What if I told you that the civil rights movement was filled with so much scandal and drama that it's likely that you have never heard of one of the most important civil rights leaders that this world has seen? Stick around and find out how this Black genius's sexual orientation and political journey overshadowed his lifelong fight for equality, leadership of Dr. King, and the organizing of the March on Washington. Stay tuned.
If you black, if you genius, say, oh yeah. Put two fingers in the air. If you black, if you genius, say, oh yeah. Put two fingers in the air, cause I'm black, I'm a genius, I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah. Put two fingers in the air. If you're black, if you're genius, scream, oh yeah. Yeah, I said I'm black and
Rustin was born on March 17, 1912, raised by his grandparents, who he thought were his original birth parents. Ain't that crazy? They were early members of the NAACP and would often host great leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois at their house while Bayard was a child. Rustin was taught nonviolence as a youth, as one of the tenets of his grandparents' Quaker lifestyle. As a teen, he began organizing protests at the local restaurants where his white teammates were served, but he and his fellow black teammates had to eat on a balcony called Nigger Heaven. He got arrested for protesting, but was eventually bailed out. This would become an ongoing theme in his life. As a teen, he also revealed to his grandmother that he was gay, something else that would follow him throughout his entire life. He briefly attended Wilberforce University and the first HBCU, Cheyney State Teachers College. He eventually moved to Harlem and enrolled in New York City College, where he sang and eventually performed on Broadway with Paul Robeson. He used the money from singing to help pay for college. While in college, Rustin registered as a communist, but decided to leave the organization around the time of World War II, as the Communist Party's goals had changed. In fact, he bypassed his draft into World War II by applying as a conscientious objector. His application was accepted by the board, and he was tasked with doing an alternative service, 2 years of civilian work. After distancing himself from the Communist Party, Rustin put all of his time into a march that was being organized by A. Philip Randolph. This March on Washington was to protest racial segregation in the defense contracting industry and the military. However, before this march could happen, on June 25th, 1941, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802. Executive Order 8802 was to prohibit ethnic or racial discrimination in the nation's defense industry. It prohibited the exact thing that the march was going to protest. So, A. Philip Randolph called the march off. This decision upset Bayard. He not only wanted desegregation in the military and the defense industry, he wanted desegregation in all industries. Bayard began traveling and speaking and protesting all over the country. Unfortunately, the attention that he gained from the protests, his speaking engagements, and arrests came back to bite. Remember when I said that he didn't have to serve in World War II because he was a conscientious objector? Well, because he did not go to war, he had to regularly show up for alternative service. 2 years doing civilian work. The touring and the speaking engagements proved that he wasn't completing that work. The draft board got wind of this and had him arrested. He served 2 years and was moved from prison to prison because he protested prison segregation. And he was an openly black gay man, something that led to many beatings and fights with the other prisoners. Eventually, he was released. So, he traveled to India and further studied the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. When he returned to the States, he began working with A. Philip Randolph again. At this time, the Montgomery bus boycott, ignited by Rosa Parks, was underway, and a man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. was gaining popularity as a civil rights leader in the South. A. Philip Randolph suggested that the 45-year-old Rustin travel to Alabama to support King's efforts. So he did. When he got there, he immediately had King remove his armed security and educated him in the teaching of non-violent, peaceful protests and civil disobedience, something he learned while in India. Using these strategies, Dr. King planned a 1960s march outside of the Democratic National Convention. Adam Clayton Powell threatened, if King moves forward with the march, then he would lie to the press and tell them that King and Rustin were in a sexual relationship. This could have had severe consequences for the movement. So, King called off the march and distanced himself from Rustin. Rustin eventually quit SNCC, and Powell became the chairman of the Education and Labor Committee, the most powerful position held by an African American in Congress. A. Philip Randolph and Rustin began planning another march, this time for economic justice. In May of 1963, police were recorded unleashing attack dogs and turning fire hoses on Black children and families in Birmingham, Alabama. Color television and daily news coverage was becoming widely adopted at the time, and this visual shocked America. King, who didn't seem that interested in the march before, was now interested. He insisted on focusing the march on civil rights, and eventually it became the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. As Rustin began organizing all of the civil rights groups at the time, his past came to haunt him once again. Some Black leaders thought that Rustin's reputation as a gay, communist draft dodger would hurt the movement, and they insisted that he not be on the front line. As a result, A. Philip Randolph became the march's director, and Rustin his deputy. Senator Strom Thurmond received Rustin's FBI file. You see, the FBI had been tracking Rustin since college. Nosy, you in my business. I know they did. And he publicly disgraced him on the Senate floor, again, attacking him as a gay, communist draft dodger. But Rustin refused to back down. He continued to organize the march. He wrote a list of 10 demands and delivered them to the 250,000 people in attendance at the March on Washington, following the I Have a Dream speech. This led to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Rustin continued to work with the government in trying to get policies that supported Black people. Unfortunately, his willingness to work with the government placed him at odds with the people in the very movement that he helped to build. In the 1980s, he publicly addressed his homosexuality, and he began organizing for gay and lesbian rights, and was one of the earliest AIDS activists. Days before the 24th anniversary of the March on Washington, Rustin died of a perforated appendix. In 2013, 50 years after the march, President Barack Obama posthumously awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Woo child! The drama. That's Black Genius Bayard Rustin. Now you see how all of this scandal overshadowed Rustin's lifelong fight for equality. Thanks y'all for learning and watching with me today. And remember, stay Black, stay genius. HD out.